The video call froze for exactly 3 seconds before the sound caught up. And in those 3 seconds, I watched my entire future crumble in pixelated slow motion. There was Jessica, my fiancée of 2 years, sitting in what used to be our living room, her hand resting on a belly that had grown considerably since our last call 3 weeks ago. But that wasn't what made my blood run cold. It was the man sitting next to her, his arm casually draped across the back of the couch behind her, shoulders looking more comfortable in my spot than I ever had. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Marcus, honey, I need to tell you something, Jessica said, her voice carrying that particular tone she used when she was about to ask for something she knew I wouldn't like. But this time, there was something different in her eyes, something that looked almost like relief. This is Ryan. He's been helping me through the pregnancy. You know how scared I've been about doing this alone? Ryan gave a little wave to the camera, and I noticed the way his fingers briefly touched Jessica's shoulder as he did it. The gesture was too familiar, too intimate for someone who was supposed to be just a friend helping out. It'd been deployed for 6 months with 3 more to go, and apparently I'd been replaced. Hey Marcus, Ryan said, and his voice had that easy confidence of someone who knew he was winning. Jess has told me so much about you. Thanks for your service, man. I should have exploded, should have demanded explanations, threatened to catch the first flight home, made accusations. But instead, I found myself nodding slowly, taking in every detail of the scene in front of me. The way Jessica leaned slightly toward Ryan when she spoke, the prenatal vitamins on the coffee table that I'd ordered for her, now clearly being managed by someone else, the ultrasound photos stuck to the refrigerator in the background, photos I hadn't seen yet. That's really thoughtful of you, Ryan, I heard myself say, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. I appreciate you looking out for Jessica and the baby while I'm over here. Jessica blinked, clearly expecting a different reaction. Marcus, are you okay? You seem calm. Why wouldn't I be calm? I asked, leaning back in my chair in the small communications room at the base in Germany. You're getting the support you need. It's what matters. The confusion on both their faces might have been funny under different circumstances. Ryan shifted uncomfortably, probably wondering why the deployed boyfriend wasn't losing his mind. Jessica opened her mouth to say something else, but I was already formulating my next move. Actually, I'm glad you called, I continued, pulling up my laptop while keeping the video call running on my phone. I've been thinking about our situation a lot lately. The deployment, the baby coming, our future. I think we need to have a serious conversation about what's realistic here. What do you mean? Jessica asked, and now there was a hint of panic in her voice. I think we both know this isn't working. The distance, the timing, everything. Maybe we should consider what's best for everyone involved. Ryan's eyebrows shot up, and I could see him trying to process whether this was some kind of trap. Jessica's face went pale, which was quite a feat considering she was already pretty washed out from the pregnancy. Marcus, you don't mean that? She said quickly. It's just the deployment talking. When you get back, everything will be normal again. But I wasn't the same person who had left Nashville 9 months ago. 6 months of being responsible for supply chains that kept soldiers alive had given me a different perspective on what really mattered. And sitting in that cramped communications room, looking at my replacement sitting in my spot, I realized I felt more relief than heartbreak. I think Ryan seems like a really good guy, I said, watching both of their faces carefully, and you two seem comfortable together. The silence stretched out until the video call's timer warned us we only had 2 minutes left. Military communications had strict time limits, but for once, I was grateful for the constraint. We should probably talk more about this when I have better internet, I said finally. But Jessica, I want you to know that whatever decision you make, I want you and the baby to be happy and healthy. That's what's most important. Marcus, wait, Jessica started, but I was already reaching for the disconnect button. Take care of yourself, Jessica, and thank you again, Ryan. It means a lot to know she's not alone. I ended the call and sat there in the silence of the communications room, staring at the blank screen. 6 months ago, that conversation would have destroyed me. But now, all I felt was a strange sense of clarity. For for the first time in 2 years. I wasn't trying to figure out how to make Jessica happy while compromising everything I wanted for her. Myself, my phone buzzed with a text from my buddy Tommy, who was stationed at the same base. "Comes room free? Need to call my mom?" "It's all yours," I texted back, gathering my things. As I walked back to the barracks, I found myself thinking about the logistics of the situation rather than the emotions. Jessica was 7 months pregnant with a baby that was definitely mine, given the timing. But Ryan was clearly positioning himself as the primary support system. The apartment lease in Nashville was in both our names, but I'd been paying the full amount while deployed. My deployment pay was going into a savings account for our future, money that was now just mine to figure out what to do with. Out my laptop in my bunk and started making lists, not of grievances or accusations, but of practical next steps. What needed to be canceled? What needed to be transferred? What needed to be decided? It was the same methodical approach I used for managing supply shipments, but applied to dismantling a life I'd thought I wanted. Tommy found me an hour later, hunched over spreadsheets. "Dude, you look like you're planning an invasion," he said, dropping onto his own bunk across from mine. "Everything okay with the home front?" "Actually," I said, closing the laptop and looking at him, "everything's about to be a lot clearer." The next morning, I woke up with the same clarity I'd felt the night before, which surprised me. Usually after sleeping on emotional revelations, doubt would creep in. But this felt different. This felt like I'd finally stopped fighting a current that had been pulling me under for months. I'd been awake since 0400, which wasn't unusual. Military life had trained my body to function on minimal sleep and maximum efficiency. But today, instead of going through the motions of my morning routine while thinking about Jessica, I found myself actually planning for the first time in months. The first call I made was to my brother David, who worked as a civilian contractor and was currently stateside. It was late evening in Nashville, which meant he'd be winding down from his workday and would have time to talk. "Marcus?" "Wasn't expecting to hear from you until the weekend." David's voice came through clearly on the secured line I'd managed to book for personal calls. "Everything all right over there?" "Actually, I need to ask you a favor," I said, settling into the plastic chair in the quieter communications room I'd reserved for this conversation. "And I need you to not ask too many questions until I can explain everything properly." There was a pause. David and I had always been straight with each other, even when our conversations were difficult. "Okay, I'm listening." "I need you to go to the apartment in Nashville and pack up my things. Everything that's clearly mine. My books, my tools, my clothes, anything that was mine before Jessica and I moved in together. Can you store it at your place for now?" "Marcus, what's going on? Did something happen with Jessica?" I took a deep breath. "Jessica's been seeing someone else. Basically moved into our place and is playing house with my pregnant fiancée. I'm calling off the engagement." The silence on David's end stretched long enough that I started to wonder if the connection had dropped. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was carefully controlled. "Are you sure about this?" "Yes, sometimes deployment stress can make situations seem worse than they are." "I'm sure," I said, and I was surprised by how confident I sounded. "David, I've been miserable for months, and I didn't even realize it until yesterday. This isn't about jealousy or anger. This is about finally admitting that Jessica and I want completely different things, and neither of us has been honest about it." "Okay," David said slowly. "I can do that. You want me to tell her I'm coming, or just show up?" "Tell her, be civil about it. Explain that I'm handling this maturely, and I expect the same from everyone else. This doesn't have to be dramatic." "And the baby?" That was the question I'd been dreading, but I'd thought about it extensively during my sleepless hours. "The baby is mine, and I'll take responsibility for that. But Jessica has made it clear through her actions that she wants Ryan to be the primary partner in this. I'm not going to force myself into a situation where I'm fighting for a role someone else is already filling." David was quiet again, processing. "Marcus, are you absolutely sure about this? Because once you start this process, it's going to be hard to undo." "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," I said. "For the first time in 2 years, I feel like I can breathe." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After we hung up, I sat in the communications room for a few more minutes, looking out the small window at the German countryside beyond the base fence. I had never expected to feel this way about ending an engagement, especially under these circumstances. But the overwhelming emotion wasn't sadness or anger, it was relief. My phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. "We need to talk. Can you call me tonight?" I stared at the message for a long moment before typing back. "I think we said everything we needed to say yesterday. David will be by sometime this week to pick up my things. After that, we can figure out the practical details." Her response came quickly. "Marcus, you're being ridiculous. It's not what you think." But I didn't respond. Instead, I pocketed my phone and headed to the mess hall for breakfast. For the first time in months, I was actually hungry. The next few days passed in a blur of routine military duties, but with a strange undercurrent of anticipation. I threw myself into my work with more focus than I'd had in months. Managing supply chains for a forward operating base required constant attention to detail and problem solving, skills that were apparently transferring well to managing the logistics of unwinding a life back home. Tommy noticed the change immediately. "You're different," he said on Thursday morning as we grabbed coffee before our shift. Not in a bad way, just lighter somehow. "I feel lighter," I admitted. "It's like I've been carrying around this weight I didn't even realize was there." "Jessica's situation resolved," I said, which was both true and completely inadequate to describe what had happened. Tommy nodded, understanding that some conversations happened when they happened, and others needed space. "Good for you, man. Life's too short to spend it fighting battles you don't want to win." That afternoon, David called with an update. "I went to the apartment today. Jessica was there with the Gyrene, right? They were?" "Civil," she cried. "A little, but she didn't fight me on taking your stuff. Orion helped me carry some of the heavier boxes, actually. Honestly, relieved. I think she was expecting you to come back swinging, demanding custody battles and making threats. When I explained that you just wanted a clean break and were planning to handle everything maturely, she seemed almost grateful. It stung a little, but not in the way I expected. Instead of feeling rejected, I felt validated. Jessica had been as trapped in our relationship as I had been. Neither of us had been brave enough to admit it wasn't working until circumstances forced the issue. "Hey, there's something else," David continued. "I talked to Ryan for a few minutes while Jessica was getting some of your things from the bedroom. He seems like a decent guy, Marcus. He's not some player taking advantage of a vulnerable pregnant woman. They've been friends for over a year, and he's genuinely concerned about doing right by both you and Jessica." "What do you mean?" "Day asked me to tell you that he never intended for things to happen this way. He knows the situation is complicated, and he respects that you're the baby's father. He wants to make sure there's room for you to be involved if that's what you want." I processed this information while looking out at the German sunset through the communications room window. Ryan wasn't the villain I might have made him out to be in a different mindset. He was just a guy who had fallen for a woman who happened to be engaged to someone else. The timing was terrible, but the emotions were probably real. "Tell him I appreciate that," I said finally, "and that I don't hold any grudges against him. He didn't create this situation. He just highlighted something that was already broken." After David and I hung up, I found myself thinking about the future in a way I hadn't in months. Not the future I had planned with Jessica, but the actual future that was now opening up in front of me. I had 3 months left on my deployment, and then I would be stateside with no obligations except to figure out what I actually wanted from life. For the first time since I'd enlisted, I started thinking about what I might want to do after the military. My logistics experience would translate well to civilian supply chain management. I had deployment savings that could fund additional education or training. I could live anywhere in the country, pursue any opportunity that interested me. The baby would complicate things, but not in the way I had initially feared. If Jessica and Ryan were building a stable home together, my role could be that of a supportive co-parent rather than a primary caregiver fighting for custody. It wasn't the family structure I had envisioned, but it might actually be healthier for everyone involved. That evening, I video called my parents for the first time in 3 weeks. They lived in a small town in Ohio, where my father worked as a high school principal and my mother managed the local library. They had been cautiously supportive of my engagement to Jessica, but I had always sensed they had reservations they were too polite to voice. "Marcus," my mother said when the call connected, her face lighting up in the way that still made me feel like I was 10 years old. "We weren't expecting to hear from you tonight." "I have some news," I said, settling into the familiar routine of updating them on my life. "Jessica and I have decided to end our engagement." The silence that followed was filled with the kind of parental processing that happens when your child drops unexpected news. My father leaned into the frame next to my mother, his expression carefully neutral. "Are you all right, son?" he asked, and I could hear the concern in his voice. "I'm actually better than I've been in a long time," I said honestly. This wasn't a sudden decision, and it wasn't made in anger. We both realize we want different things from life, and it's better to acknowledge that now than to try to force something that isn't working. My mother's expression shifted from concern to something that looked almost like relief. "Marcus, I hope you know that your father and I just want you to be happy. We've been worried that you seemed stressed lately, even in your calls." "I didn't realize it was that obvious," I said, smiling for the first time during a family call in months. "You're our son," my father said simply. "We know when something's not right." We talked for another 20 minutes about my plans for after deployment, my career options, and the baby situation.
Oh.
My parents took the news about becoming grandparents under complicated circumstances with the same steady grace they had brought to every other unexpected situation in our family. "The baby will always be our grandchild," my mother said firmly. "Whatever arrangements you and Jessica work out, that won't change." After we hung up, I realized that the conversation had been the first time in months that talking about my future had felt energizing rather than exhausting. I was starting to understand that the dread I'd been feeling about returning home hadn't been about the deployment ending. It had been about returning to a life that didn't fit me anymore. The next morning, I woke up before my alarm for the first time in weeks, not because I was anxious, but because I was actually eager to start the day. I had 3 months to figure out what I wanted my post-military life to look like. And for the first time in years, I had the freedom to make that decision based on what I actually wanted, rather than what I thought I was supposed to want. I spent that morning researching veteran transition programs, educational opportunities, and cities where my skills might be in demand. I made lists of questions to ask during job interviews and started thinking about what kind of work environment would actually make me happy rather than just provide a steady paycheck. By the time Tommy found me at lunch, I was deep into research about logistics management programs in different cities. "Let me guess," he said, sliding his tray across from mine. "You're planning your post-military world domination?" "Something like that," I said, turning my laptop around to show him the spreadsheet I'd created, comparing different cities based on job market, cost of living, and proximity to good schools for when the baby was old enough for visits. "Marcus, 3 days ago, you were a guy trying to hold together a long-distance relationship. Now you look like someone plotting a hostile takeover of civilian life." "Maybe I am," I said, and realized I meant it. That afternoon, I received an email that would change everything. It was from a veterans transition organization called Pathways Forward, based in Atlanta. They had received my name from a military career counselor I had spoken with months earlier, and they were reaching out about a logistics coordinator position that had just opened up. The job description read like it had been written specifically for my skill set, coordinating supply chains for nonprofit organizations serving veteran populations. With opportunities for advancement into program management and strategic planning, the salary was competitive, the benefits were comprehensive, and the work would be directly helping other veterans navigate their own transitions. But what caught my attention was the location. Atlanta was far enough from Nashville to represent a clean start, but close enough that I could easily travel back for anything related to the baby. It was a major metropolitan area with plenty of opportunities for professional growth, and the organization seemed to value the kind of practical problem-solving skills that the military had taught me. I spent the rest of the afternoon crafting a cover letter and updating my resume. For the first time in my adult life, I was applying for a job because I actually wanted it, not because it seemed like the next logical step or because it fit into someone else's timeline for my life. As I hit send on the application, I realized that Jessica's betrayal had inadvertently given me the greatest gift she could have, the freedom to choose my own path forward. I was no longer trying to build a life that would make someone else happy, while sacrificing my own goals and dreams. That evening, I called David again to check on the logistics of my move. "Everything's packed and stored," he reported. "Jessica asked me to give you this message. She hopes you can find a way to be happy. She's sorry things worked out this way." "Tell her I said the same thing," I replied. "And David, thanks for handling this so professionally." "I know it's weird being in the middle of it." "Actually," David said, "I'm proud of how you're handling this. A lot of guys would have lost their minds and made everything 10 times harder for everyone involved. You're being a grown-up about a really complicated situation." After we hung up, I sat in my bunk writing in the journal I had started keeping during deployment. It had initially been a way to process the stress of being away from home, but now it was becoming a record of the most transformative period of my life. "Today I realized that sometimes the worst thing that can happen to you is actually the best thing," I wrote. 6 months ago, if someone had told me that Jessica would choose someone else, I would have thought my life was over. Now I realize my life is just beginning. I closed the journal and looked around the small space that had been my home for the past 6 months. In 3 months, I would be starting over completely. New city, new job, new relationship with my role as a father, new understanding of what I wanted from life. For the first time since I had enlisted, I felt like I was moving towards something I had chosen rather than something that had been chosen for me. And that feeling was better than any relationship I had ever tried to force into working. After sending my application to Pathways Forward, I received a response that surprised me with its immediacy and enthusiasm. Sarah Chen, the program director, wanted to schedule a video interview within the next few days. Her email was direct and professional, but there was something about her tone that suggested she understood the unique challenges veterans faced. During transition periods, the interview was scheduled for Thursday afternoon, which gave me 3 days to prepare. I spent those days researching everything I could about the organization, our mission, and the specific challenges facing veteran populations in the Southeast. What I discovered impressed me more than I had expected. Pathways Forward wasn't just another nonprofit going through the motions of veteran support. They had developed innovative programs that addressed the practical realities of military to civilian transition, housing assistance that went beyond temporary shelter, job training that built on existing military skills rather than starting from scratch, and mental health support that understood the unique pressures of readjusting to civilian life. When Thursday arrived, I found myself genuinely excited about the conversation rather than just nervous about landing a job. The communications room I had reserved was quieter than usual, and the internet connection was stable enough for a professional video call. Sarah appeared on screen exactly at the scheduled time, and I immediately noticed that she had the bearing of someone who understood military punctuality. She was probably in her early 30s, with dark hair pulled back professionally, and eyes that suggested she was accustomed to evaluating people quickly and accurately. "Marcus, thank you for making time for this conversation," she said, settling into what appeared to be a well-organized office. "I've reviewed your military record and your application materials. Your logistics background is exactly what we need for this position, but I'm more interested in understanding what draws you to this type of work." It was a question I had prepared for, but sitting there in that communications room halfway around the world, I found myself giving a more honest answer than I had planned. 6 months ago, I thought I knew exactly what my post-military life was going to look like, I said. I had plans that seemed solid, relationships that seemed stable, a future that seemed predictable. But deployment has a way of clarifying what actually matters versus what you think is supposed to matter. Sarah nodded, and I could see that she was really listening rather than just waiting for her turn to speak. What I've realized is that the skills the military taught me, problem-solving under pressure, managing complex systems, adapting to unexpected circumstances, those skills are most valuable. When they're used to help other people navigate difficult transitions, I want to work somewhere that the challenges are meaningful, not just profitable. "Tell me about a time when you had to adapt to unexpected circumstances," Sarah said, and I could see her taking notes. I thought about the question for a moment, then decided to be completely honest about my current situation. Actually, I'm living through that right now, I said. 2 weeks ago, I discovered that my fiancée back home has been building a life with someone else while I've been deployed. We're ending our engagement, but she's pregnant with my child. 6 months ago, that would have felt like a crisis that threatened to derail everything I had planned. Now, it feels like an opportunity to build something better. Sarah's expression shifted slightly, becoming more interested rather than concerned. How are you approaching that situation? It's the same way I approach supply chain problems, I said. First, assess what resources are actually available versus what you thought you had. Then, identify what outcomes are actually achievable versus what you originally hoped for. Finally, develop a plan that maximizes positive results for everyone involved. Even if it doesn't look like what you initially envisioned, and what does that look like practically? It means accepting that my role as this child's father might be different than I originally planned, but still important. It means focusing on building a stable, independent life that allows me to be a positive influence. Rather than trying to force myself into a family structure that doesn't work. And it means choosing work that aligns with my values rather than just taking whatever job seems most convenient. Sarah was quiet for a moment, and I wondered if I had shared too much personal information. But when she spoke again, her voice had a warmth that hadn't been there before. Marcus, one of the biggest challenges we face in veteran transition work is helping people understand that military skills are valuable in civilian contexts, but that the transition often requires redefining what success looks like. Like you're already doing that work for yourself. We spent the next 30 minutes discussing the specific responsibilities of the position, the organization's current challenges, and my ideas for improving their supply chain efficiency. Struck me most was that Sarah was interested in my opinions about how their programs could be improved. It's not just whether I could follow existing procedures. We're looking for someone who can think strategically about how to scale our operations, she explained. We're currently serving about 300 veterans annually, but the demand is much higher. We need someone who can help us figure out how to serve more people without compromising the quality of our support. What's the biggest bottleneck right now, I asked. Honestly, coordination between different service providers. We work with housing organizations, job training programs, mental health services, and educational institutions. But there's no systematic way to track someone's progress across all those different touch points, which means people fall through the cracks. I could immediately see several solutions to that problem, and I found myself sketching out ideas even as we talked. This was exactly the kind of complex logistics challenge that energized me, but with a purpose that felt infinitely more meaningful than managing military supply chains. Would you be interested in seeing some preliminary ideas for a coordination system? I asked. I could put together a proposal based on what you've described. Sarah's eyes lit up. That would be incredibly helpful. When do you think you could have something ready? Give me a week, I said. I'll send you a detailed analysis with specific recommendations. After we ended the call, I sat in the communications room for several more minutes, feeling energized in a way I hadn't experienced in months. This wasn't just a job opportunity, it was a chance to use everything the military had taught me in service of something that mattered on a personal level. I spent the rest of that afternoon and most of the evening working on the proposal I had promised Sarah. The more I researched veteran transition challenges, the more I understood that this was work I was uniquely positioned to do well. I had lived through the uncertainty of military life, the complexity of deployment cycles, and now the challenge of rebuilding plans when circumstances changed unexpectedly. By the time I finished the initial draft of my proposal, it was nearly midnight. But I felt more awake and focused than I had in weeks. I had found something worth working toward that had nothing to do with trying to fix a relationship that had been broken long before I realized it. The next morning, Tommy found me in the mess hall, hunched over my laptop with papers spread around. My breakfast tray. Let me guess, he said, sliding into the seat across from me. You're planning to revolutionize the entire veteran services industry before lunch? Something like that, I said, turning my screen around to show him the organizational chart I had created. Look at this. They're trying to coordinate services across 12 different partner organizations. But they don't have any systematic way to track outcomes or identify where people are getting stuck in the process. Tommy studied the chart for a moment, then looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Marcus, you realize you're talking about this job like you've already got it, right? I paused, considering his observation. Maybe I am. But not because I'm overconfident about getting hired, because I finally found work that I actually want to do, regardless of whether this specific opportunity works out. That's a good place to be, Tommy said. Especially considering where your head was at 2 weeks ago. He was right. 2 weeks ago, I had been someone trying to hold together a life that wasn't working, making decisions based on obligation rather than genuine desire. Now I was someone actively building toward a future that excited me rather than just accepting whatever circumstances presented themselves. That afternoon, I received an email from Jessica. It was the first direct communication we'd had since the video call that had changed everything. Marcus, I know things are complicated right now, but I wanted you to know that Ryan and I have been talking about how to make sure you can be involved with the baby as much as you want to be. We don't want this situation to cost you a relationship with your child. Can we set up a time to talk about practical arrangements? I read the email twice before responding. 3 weeks ago, I would have interpreted this as either a threat or a manipulation. Now I could see it for what it actually was, an attempt to navigate a difficult situation with maturity and consideration for everyone involved. Jessica, I appreciate you reaching out, I typed back. I think it would be helpful to have that conversation, but I'd like to wait until I'm stateside and can think more clearly about logistics. I'm interviewing for jobs in different cities, so I want to understand what my situation will be before we make specific plans. But I want you to know that I'm committed to being a good father, even if the family structure is different than we originally planned. Her response came quickly. That sounds reasonable. And Marcus, I hope you find what you're looking for. I stared at that last line for a long time. 3 weeks ago, I would have read it as dismissive or sarcastic. Now I could hear the genuine wish behind it. Jessica and I had made each other miserable for months, but that didn't mean we were bad people. We had just been trying to force something. That didn't fit, and we had both been too afraid to admit it until circumstances made denial impossible. As I closed my laptop that evening, I realized that I had spent the entire day focused on building something new, rather than mourning something that was ending. For the first time in months, I was excited about waking up the next morning to continue working on plans that were entirely my own. The phone call from Sarah came on a Tuesday morning while I was reviewing supply inventory reports. Her voice carried an excitement that immediately told me the news was good, before she even said the words. Marcus, we'd like to offer you the position, she said without preamble. Your proposal was exactly what we needed to see. When can you start? I felt a rush of satisfaction that had nothing to do with simply landing a job and everything to do with finding work that aligned with what I actually wanted to be doing with my life. My deployment ends in 6 weeks. I could be in Atlanta by the 1st of next month. Perfect. I'm sending over the official offer details today, but I wanted to give you the good news personally. Marcus, I have to tell you, your approach to systematic problem solving is going to transform how we operate. The board was impressed with your analysis. After we hung up, I sat in the communications room staring out at the German countryside, feeling like I was looking at the landscape of my old life from the window of my new one. 6 weeks from now, I would be starting fresh in a city where nobody knew my history, doing work that mattered to me, building a life based on my own choices rather than inherited expectations. The next call I made was to David, who answered. On the second ring, despite the early hour in Nashville, I got the job, I said without preamble. Atlanta. He asked and I could hear him waking up fully. Atlanta. I start the first week of next month. There was a pause, and then David's voice carried a note of something that might have been pride. Marcus, I have to say, watching you handle this whole situation has been impressive. Most people would have fallen apart or gotten bitter, but turned it into rocket fuel. I had help, I said. Jessica forcing the issue probably saved us both years of being miserable. Speaking of Jessica, She asked me to let you know that she had the baby shower last weekend. Ryan's family and her family were there together. Apparently, it went well. I processed this information, waiting for the stab of pain or jealousy that I expected to feel. Instead, I felt something closer to relief. That's good. It sounds like they're building something stable, or something else, David continued. She wanted me to ask if you'd be okay with Ryan being listed as the birth partner on the hospital forms when the time comes. She said she doesn't want to put you in an awkward position, but she also doesn't want to navigate labor without support. 3 months ago, that request would have felt like a knife in the chest. Now it felt like a practical question that deserved a practical answer. Tell her that's fine, I said. Ryan's been there for the pregnancy. It makes sense for him to be there for the birth. I'll figure out my own relationship with the baby after everyone's had time to adjust to the new reality. You sure about that, David? I'm about to move to a new city to start a new career, helping veterans rebuild their lives after major transitions. If I can't handle my own transition with some grace, I'm probably not qualified for the job. That afternoon, I called my parents to share the news about the job offer. My mother's voice brightened immediately when I described the work I'd be doing. Marcus, that sounds perfect for you, she said. You've always been good at seeing how to fix systems that aren't working properly. And Atlanta's a good city, my father added. Close enough that we can visit. Far enough that you can build your own life without feeling like you're under a microscope. We talked for another 20 minutes about logistics and timing. My parents offered to help with the move, which I gratefully accepted. It would be good to have family support during the transition. And I realized I was looking forward to introducing them to my new life, rather than dreading their judgment about my failed engagement. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation and anticipation. I threw myself into my remaining military duties with renewed focus, wanting to finish strong and leave everything in good order for whoever would take over my responsibilities, but the real energy was going into planning my civilian life. I spent hours researching Atlanta neighborhoods, looking for a place that would be close to my new job but also comfortable for a child to visit. I found a one-bedroom apartment in a complex that had a pool and playground in a neighborhood with good schools and family-friendly restaurants. It wasn't fancy, but it was clean and affordable, and felt like a place where I could build the kind of life I actually wanted. The lease was signed electronically, with a move-in date coordinated with my return to the States. David offered to drive down with a rental truck to help me get settled, which felt like exactly the kind of practical family support I needed during a major transition. But the most significant conversation happened 3 weeks before my deployment ended, when Sarah called with an unexpected update. Marcus, I wanted to give you a heads up about something, she said, and her tone was more serious than usual. We just received funding for a new program that we'd like you to consider taking lead on. It's focused specifically on helping veterans navigate family transitions, divorce, custody arrangements, blended families, that kind of thing. I felt a jolt of recognition. What made you think of that focus area, honestly? Your interview. The way you talked about adapting to unexpected family circumstances made me realize we're probably missing a huge population of veterans who need support that's more nuanced than just job placement and housing assistance. What would that look like practically? I'm still developing the program design. We're thinking about coordination with family law attorneys who understand military benefits, counseling services that specialize in transition stress, and support groups. For veterans dealing with custody arrangements or blended family dynamics, you'd be working with other organizations, but you'd be designing the service delivery model. I was quiet for a moment, thinking about the implications. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was a chance to build something that could help other people navigate the exact kind of complicated family transition I was living through. Sarah, I'm very interested in that, I said finally. When do you need an answer? Take your time. We can discuss it more when you get to Atlanta. But Marcus, I think your personal experience with this kind of situation could be incredibly valuable in designing services that actually work for real people dealing with real complications. After we hung up, I sat in my bunk thinking about the strange way life had of turning painful experiences into opportunities to help other people. 6 months ago, I had been someone trying to avoid dealing with the problems in my relationship. Now, I was someone who might be able to help other veterans navigate similar challenges more successfully than I had initially managed. That evening, I wrote a long email to Jessica, the first substantial communication we'd had since I'd ended our engagement. Jessica, I wanted to let you know that I'll be moving to Atlanta when my deployment ends. I've accepted a position with a veterans service organization that I'm excited about. I also wanted you to know that I think you and Ryan are handling this situation with a lot of maturity. I appreciate that you're both considering how to include me in the baby's life in a way that works for everyone. I paused, thinking about how to express what I really wanted to say. I know this isn't how either of us expected things to work out, but I think we're both going to be happier with the lives we're building now than we would have been trying to force something that wasn't really working. I hope the rest of your pregnancy goes smoothly, and I hope you and Ryan build something great together. Her response came the next day. Marcus, thank you for saying that. I've been feeling guilty about how everything happened, but you're right that we're probably all going to be happier this way. Ryan and I have been talking about how to make sure the baby knows their father and feels connected to your family too. We want to do this right. I read her email several times, struck by how different our communication had. It's become now that we weren't trying to save a relationship that neither of us had really wanted to be in. We were both more honest, more direct, and more focused on practical solutions than emotional drama. 3 weeks later, I boarded a military transport flight from Germany to Fort Campbell for my out-processing. Carrying 2 duffel bags and a sense of anticipation that felt entirely new, I was returning to the United States as a completely different person than the one who had deployed 9 months earlier. David met me at the base with a grin and a rental truck already loaded with my belongings from storage. Ready for your new life? He asked as we loaded my military gear into the truck. More ready than I've ever been for anything, I said, and meant it completely. Atlanta in March was a revelation. After 9 months of German winters and military bases, the city felt alive with possibilities I hadn't even known I was craving. My apartment was everything I had hoped for when I signed the lease sight unseen, and more importantly, it felt like mine in a way that the Nashville place never had. Sarah had given me a week to settle in before starting work, which turned out to be exactly the time I needed to establish routines that felt sustainable rather than just functional. I found a gym that offered veteran discounts, located a grocery store that wasn't overwhelming after months of military mess halls, and discovered a coffee shop within walking distance that became my unofficial second office. But the real test came on my 3rd day in the city when my phone rang with Jessica's name on the caller ID. Marcus, I'm in labor, she said without preamble, her voice tight with pain and exhaustion. The contractions started this morning, and we're at the hospital. Now? I sat down heavily in my new living room, suddenly understanding that knowing about something intellectually and experiencing it emotionally were completely different things. How are you doing? I asked, which felt inadequate but was the only question that mattered. Scared, she admitted, but Ryan's here, and my mom flew in yesterday. The doctor says everything looks normal, but it's happening faster than we expected. There was a pause filled with the background noise of hospital activity, and then she spoke again, her voice softer. Marcus, I know this is complicated, but I wanted you to know when it was happening. You're going to be a father today. Weight of that statement hit me with unexpected force. For months, I'd been thinking about the baby as a future abstract responsibility. Now, suddenly it was real and immediate and happening 3 hours away from where I sat in my empty apartment. Do you want me to drive up? I asked, though I wasn't sure what the right answer was. No, she said quickly, then seemed to reconsider. I mean, not for the birth. Ryan and I have that covered. But maybe tomorrow? When things are calmer and we can introduce you properly? That sounds reasonable, I said, though nothing about the situation felt reasonable. Jessica, I want you to know that whatever happens today, I'm grateful that you're giving this baby a good start with people who love them. She was quiet for a moment, and I could hear her breathing through another contraction. And Marcus. Sorry about how everything happened between us, but I'm not sorry about how it's working out. Does that make sense? Perfect sense, I said, and realized I meant it. We hung up, and I spent the rest of the day in a strange state of suspended animation. I couldn't concentrate on unpacking or setting up my apartment but I also couldn't just sit and wait for news.
Ollie?
I decided to drive around Atlanta, learning the city that was going to be my home while my child was being born in the city that had been my past. The call came at 8:47 that evening. "It's a girl," Jessica said, and her voice was exhausted but triumphant. 7 pounds, 3 ounces. She's perfect. I closed my eyes and leaned against my kitchen counter, feeling a surge of emotion that I hadn't been prepared for. "What's her name?" "Emily Rose," Jessica said. "Emily after my grandmother, Rose?" After Ryan's mother. I noticed that there was no mention of naming her after anyone in my family, and I was surprised to find that I didn't mind. This baby was going to grow up in Jessica and Ryan's world, with their families and their traditions. My role would be different, but it didn't need to be commemorated in her name to be important. "She's beautiful," Jessica continued. "She's healthy and alert, and already looking around like she's trying to figure out where she landed. Ken, I see pictures. I'll send some tomorrow when I'm more coherent. But Marcus, when you come to meet her, there's something I need to tell you in person. It's not bad news," she added quickly, "but it's important." After we hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling like I was balanced on the edge of something I couldn't quite name. I was a father now, which was simultaneously exactly what I had expected and nothing like what I had prepared for. The baby existed in the world, but in a family structure that I was adjacent to rather than central to. I called my parents too. Share the news. My mother cried with joy while my father asked practical questions about visiting schedules and legal arrangements. I called David, who congratulated me, and immediately started planning a trip to Atlanta to help me baby-proof my apartment. I even sent a text to Tommy, still deployed in Germany, who responded with a string of celebration emojis and a promise to send a care package. But the call that surprised me came an hour later from Sarah. "I heard through the grapevine that congratulations are in order," she said, and her voice was warm with genuine happiness. "How are you holding up?" "I'm not sure yet," I said honestly. "It's surreal. Months ago I thought I knew exactly what being a father was going to look like. Now I'm figuring it out as I go. It's probably healthier than having rigid expectations," Sarah said. "Marcus, I wanted to let you know that the family transition program we discussed is moving forward faster than we anticipated. The funding came through, and we're hoping to launch a pilot version within the next 3 months." "That's incredible," I said, though I was struggling to focus on work-related news while processing the reality of becoming a father. "What I'm really calling about is this. Would you be interested in using your own experience as part of the program development? Not in a way that violates your privacy," she added quickly, "but in terms of understanding what resources would actually be helpful for veterans navigating complicated family transitions." I thought about the question while looking out my apartment. Window at the Atlanta skyline. 3 months ago, I would have said no immediately. Too raw and too defensive to consider my personal situation as anything other than a private struggle. Now it felt like an opportunity to transform a difficult experience into something that could help other people. "I think I would be," I said. "But I want to get through the next few months and see how things stabilize before I make any commitments. Of course, just keep it in mind. Sometimes the best advocates for change are people who've lived through the challenges firsthand." The next morning, I made the drive to Nashville with a mixture of anticipation and anxiety that reminded me of going on patrol in unfamiliar territory. I had bought a car seat and installed it carefully in my back seat, though I wouldn't be bringing Emily home with me. It felt important to be prepared, to signal that I was taking my role seriously, even if it looked different than traditional fatherhood. The hospital was busier than I had expected, and finding the maternity ward felt like navigating a maze. But when I finally located Jessica's room and knocked on the door, Ryan answered with a genuine smile and a firm handshake. "Marcus, good to see you," he said, and his tone was respectful rather than territorial. "She's been waiting for you." Jessica was sitting up in bed, looking tired but radiant in the way that new mothers do. And there, in a clear bassinet beside the bed, was the smallest person I had ever seen. "Marcus, meet your daughter," Jessica said softly. I approached the bassinet slowly, not sure what I was supposed to feel or do. Emily was awake, her dark eyes moving restlessly as she took in her surroundings. She was smaller than I had imagined, but also more substantial somehow. More real. "Can I hold her?" I asked. "Of course," Jessica said. "Ryan, can you show him how to support her head?" The next few minutes were a blur of careful instructions and nervous movements, but then Emily was in my arms, and everything else faded into background noise. She was warm and solid and surprisingly alert, studying my face with an intensity that seemed impossible for someone who had been in the world for less than 24 hours. "She knows you," Jessica said quietly. "Look how she's focusing on you." I looked down at Emily, trying to memorize every detail of her face, and felt something shift inside my chest. This wasn't the abstract future responsibility I had been planning for. This was a specific human being who would grow up knowing that I was her father, even if I wasn't going to be raising her day to day. "Jessica," I said without looking up from Emily, "what did you want to tell me?" "Ryan and I have been talking," she said, glancing at him for support. "We want to make sure you feel like Emily's father, not just like someone who visits occasionally. We're thinking about moving to Atlanta." Looked up sharply. "What?" "Ryan can transfer with his company," Jessica continued. "And there are good hospitals there where I can continue my nursing career. We've been researching it for the past month. You want to move to Atlanta so I can be closer to Emily?" "We want to move to Atlanta so Emily can grow up knowing both her parents," Ryan said, speaking for the first time since I'd arrived. "Marcus, you've handled this whole situation with more class than I would have managed. The least we can do is make sure you don't have to choose between building your new life and being present for your daughter." I stared at them both, holding Emily and trying to process what they were offering. It wasn't the family structure I had originally planned, but it was something potentially better. A co-parenting arrangement based on mutual respect rather than romantic obligation. "Are you sure about this?" I asked. "That's a big move to make for someone else's convenience." "It's not for your convenience," Jessica said firmly. "It's for Emily's future and for our peace of mind. We want to do this right, Marcus." Us. As I looked down at Emily, who was still studying my face with those impossibly serious dark eyes, I realized that this was what transformation actually looked like. Not a dramatic moment of revelation, but a gradual reconstruction of what family could mean when everyone involved was committed to putting the child's needs first. 6 months later, I was standing in my apartment, helping Emily take her first wobbly steps between the couch and coffee table, when my phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "The family transition program just got approved for full funding. To grab coffee tomorrow and talk about your new promotion." I watched Emily plop down on her diaper-padded bottom and immediately start crawling toward her favorite toy, a stuffed elephant that Ryan had bought for her. She split her time between Jessica and Ryan's apartment across town and my place, schedule that had evolved naturally rather than being mandated by any court. It all discovered that flexibility worked better than rigid arrangements when it came to a baby's needs. "Daddy," Emily said clearly, reaching her arms up toward me. It was one of her first real words, and hearing it still gave me a jolt of pride mixed with responsibility. Jessica and Ryan had indeed moved to Atlanta. 3 months after Emily was born, settling into a neighborhood about 20 minutes from my apartment. The transition had been smoother than any of us had expected, partly because we had all learned to communicate as co-parents, rather than as people with complicated romantic history. The arrangement wasn't traditional, but it worked, Emily knew. She had 3 adults who loved her unconditionally, each bringing different strengths to her upbringing. Jessica provided the day-to-day nurturing and medical knowledge from her nursing background. Ryan brought patience and playfulness, plus a large extended family who had welcomed Emily as their own. I brought structure and adventure, plus a growing understanding of how to help people navigate complex family situations. My work at Pathways Forward had evolved exactly as Sarah had predicted. The family transition program had started as a small pilot serving 15 veterans. But word had spread quickly through military communities about an organization that understood that family challenges didn't fit into neat categories. We were now serving over 100 families annually, with a waiting list that suggested we needed to expand even further. The work was demanding but deeply satisfying. I spent my days helping veterans figure out custody arrangements that prioritized children's stability, connecting people with family therapists who understood military culture, and developing workshops On communication skills for blended families. Every success story reminded me that painful transitions could become opportunities for building something better. Tommy had returned from deployment and was now stationed at Fort Benning, close enough to visit regularly. He had become Emily's honorary uncle, teaching her military cadences that made Jessica laugh and Ryan shake his head in mock despair. My parents visited monthly, delighting in their granddaughter and marveling at how well the unconventional arrangement was working. "You know what's funny?" Jessica had said during a recent handoff, watching Emily toddle between Ryan and me while we discussed logistics for the following week. "I think we're all better parents together than either of us would have been trying to force a nuclear family that didn't fit." She was right. The pressure of trying to make a romantic relationship work had made us both defensive and reactive. As co-parents focused solely on Emily's well-being, we had discovered reserves of patience and creativity that neither of us had accessed before.
Nice.
But the real transformation had been internal.
Nice.
I had learned that strength wasn't about controlling outcomes or forcing situations to match your expectations. Real strength was about adapting to circumstances while staying true to your core values, building new structures when old ones no longer served their purpose. The coffee meeting with Sarah the next day was held at the same shop where I had spent my first week in Atlanta, planning my new life over endless cups of coffee and detailed spreadsheets. Now I was sitting across from her discussing how to scale a program that could help thousands of veterans navigate family transitions more successfully than I had initially managed. "Marcus, have to ask," Sarah said, stirring sugar into her latte. "Do you ever regret how things worked out? The unconventional family structure, the career change, all of it?" I thought about the question while watching traffic flow past the coffee shop window. A year ago, I had been someone trying to hold together a life that was fundamentally incompatible with who I was becoming. Now I was someone who had learned to build something new from the pieces of what hadn't worked. "The only thing I regret is how long it took me to recognize that what I thought I wanted wasn't actually making me happy," I said. "Everything else, even the painful parts, led me to where I needed to be. And where's that? Doing work that matters. Raising a daughter who's growing up knowing that families can take different shapes and still be filled with love. And understanding that the worst thing that happens to you can become the foundation for the best thing you build for yourself." That evening, Emily fell asleep in my arms while I read her a story about a little bear who goes on adventures but always comes home to a family who loves him. As I carried her to her crib in the room I had set up specifically for her visits, I thought about how different this moment was from what I had imagined fatherhood would look like 2 years ago. I had pictured traditional family dinners and weekend soccer games and all the conventional markers of successful parenting. Instead, I was learning that being a good father meant showing up consistently, communicating clearly with the other adults in Emily's life, and demonstrating through my actions that love could take many forms without being diminished. My phone buzzed with a photo from Ryan showing Emily's first attempts at finger painting earlier that day. Jessica had added a comment. "She's definitely got your determination. Refused to stop until she had covered every inch of the paper." I smiled, saving the photo to the album I kept of Emily's milestones. In a few years, she would be old enough to understand that her family looked different from some of her friends' families, but she would also understand that she was surrounded by adults who had chosen to prioritize her happiness over their own convenience, who had figured out how to work together even when it was complicated. As I settled into my evening routine, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that video call in Germany. I had gone from someone trapped in circumstances that didn't fit to someone actively building a life that aligned with my values and goals. The transformation hadn't been easy, but it had been necessary. The betrayal that had seemed like the end of everything had actually been the beginning of everything that mattered. Emily was healthy and loved. Jessica and Ryan were building a strong partnership. I was doing work that used my skills in service of something meaningful. And we were all learning that families could be defined by commitment and love rather than by conventional structures. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Click and check them out.